Well, hello everybody and welcome to Jeff's Baking Blog. Today I'm going to be making a basic Italian plaited bread, and this is a recipe I saw on King Arthur Baking, and I'm following that recipe quite closely. The only difference is they recommend using all-purpose flour, and that has a protein level. The King Arthur all-purpose flour has a protein level of 11.7%. Well, a plain flour in the UK tends to be about 10% protein, so that's not strong enough. So I'm using bread flour instead of the all-purpose or the plain flour. And that's the only difference, basically. It does take a bit of time. In fact, you have to make a starter and then you leave that overnight for it to ferment, and then the next day you can go on to make the bread, and that takes time because you have to proof the dough for 90 minutes and then a further 60 to 90 minutes later. But I think it's going to be worthwhile. So I'll go straight on to the ingredients, and for the starter I have 85 grams, which is half a cup plus 1 tablespoon of my bread flour. I have 113 millilitres, which is half a cup minus 2 teaspoons of lukewarm water, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of instant yeast. And then for the main dough I have 326 grams, which is 2 cups plus 3 tablespoons of bread flour, 170 millilitres, which is 3/4 of a cup minus 2 teaspoons of lukewarm water, 2 teaspoons of instant yeast, and 1 1/4 teaspoons of salt. And then to go on the top I'm going to use the white of 1 egg and some sesame seeds. So I'll put those to the side for the moment, and I'll put the main dough ingredients to the side as well, and we'll go on to make the starter. So for that I'm going to put my 1/8 of a teaspoon of yeast into the flour and just give it a mix around, and then pour my water in, and I'm simply going to mix that until it's all combined. And that's actually good enough. So then that needs to be covered and left at room temperature overnight. So I would say if you didn't want to leave it overnight, at least 6 to 8 hours before you go on to the next step. And I already have that done here. So I did this last night, and as you can see that's fermented very nicely. So that's ready for us to use straight away basically. I actually put a mark on my bowl, if you can see that, so that I could see whether this rose above that mark, and it did, and it sunk back a little bit. So we'll go on and put this into the bowl of my stand mixer with the other ingredients, and we'll make the dough. So what I'm going to do is to put my starter in first. And then on top of that I'm going to put my flour, and the yeast and the salt. And then I'm going to pour my water in as well. And I'm simply going to mix that on a low speed to start with. And then as it begins to come together, I'm going to turn the speed up to a medium speed, and I'm going to mix it until the dough comes together and it's elastic and quite smooth. So that's coming together quite nicely. So I'm going to turn the speed up to a medium speed, and I will allow it to knead until, as I say, it's nice and elastic and quite smooth. So that looks quite good now, I think. I think it's quite elastic, and it's reasonably smooth. It's still very tacky, of course. So I'll put that into a greased bowl, or a lightly oiled bowl. And with that in the bowl, like that, I'm actually just going to turn it over. And I'm going to cover that, and I'm going to leave it for 90 minutes. But after 45 minutes, I'm going to fold it. So I'll come back after 45 minutes and fold the dough in upon itself and turn it over, and then I'll prove it for another 45 minutes. So I'll be back to do that fold in about 45 minutes. It's now been 45 minutes, and as you can see, the dough has spread and it's risen quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just turn it over on itself. Like that, pulling it up. This is going to gently deflate the dough a little bit, and then turn the whole thing over. Just like that. And I'm going to just press it down to get some of that air out. Just like that. And then I'm going to cover it again, and I'm going to put it back in a warm place and allow it to prove for a further 45 minutes. At that time I'll come back and we'll go on to divide it into 3 and to shape it. So that 90 minutes is now up, and the dough has risen again in the bowl after we deflated it slightly. So it's now time to divide it into 3 and create our braided loaf. So this is what the dough looks like now, and I'm going to tip that out onto a lightly oiled surface. I'm just going to pat that down a little bit and divide it into about 3 equal pieces. So I've divided that fairly equally. And what I want to do is to roll each of those out until they're about 18 inches in length. And I'm sure the dough will spring back like that. But what I will do is I will roll the first one, and then I will set it to one side so that it can relax a little bit as I roll the others, and just work them until I have that length. As you can see, it springs back quite a lot. So I'll put that one to one side for a moment and work on another one. So they're about the length I want, and now I need to plait them, and what I'm going to do, it may work, it may not, I'm actually going to do that on some parchment paper, and the reason for that is that the parchment paper is going to line the baking tray. So I'm going to put the dough on. So with those on there, like that, I'm going to take the middle one and put it over to the right, like that, and then I'm going to lift this new middle one and put it over like that. And then that can go over like that. And that goes over again like that. And that goes over like that. And that goes over like that. And that goes over like that, and that goes over, and with that plaited like that and the ends folded over a little bit, what I'm going to do is to put that onto my baking tray, and then with that on the tray I can simply cut off some of the excess parchment paper. like that, and that's then ready to be rested again before it gets brushed and with egg white and sprinkled with sesame seeds. So I'm going to cover that with some plastic wrap which has been greased or oiled, just like that. So with that covered, I'm going to leave that for between an hour and an hour and a half until it's puffed up and it's proved again quite dramatically, I hope. So it should be quite puffy, and then at that stage I will have my oven preheated to 220 Celsius, that's 200 Celsius with a fan, 425 Fahrenheit, and I'll come back and we'll brush the egg white over the top and put some sesame seeds on, and then we'll put it into the oven to bake. So the braided dough has now been resting for actually about 80 minutes, and my oven is just about preheated. So what I'm going to do is brush the top with some beaten egg white. As you can see, it's risen and puffed up quite nicely. So I'm going to do this quite lightly because I don't want to deflate the dough at all. Like that, and then I'm going to sprinkle sesame seeds quite liberally all over the top. I suppose you could do this with poppy seeds if you wanted to. Just like that, and I'm going to put that into my oven, and I'm going to bake it for between 25 and 35 minutes. The longer you leave it in, the harder or crunchier the crust should become. But after about 25 to 30 minutes, I would test the internal temperature. It needs to reach at least 88 Celsius, 190 Fahrenheit, but I think in that time it will actually go higher than that, probably more like 95, 96 Celsius, which would be over 200 Fahrenheit. At that point, I will take it out of the oven and allow it to cool down, and then I'll come back and we'll have a look at the results. I baked the braided Italian bread for 25 minutes, and I tested it with an internal thermometer, and it actually tested at 97 Celsius. That's over 200 Fahrenheit. So I knew that it was baked all the way through. I took it out and allowed it to cool down, and I've actually cut into it so that we can see inside. So this is what it looks like now. So you can see the braiding still there, it's still nicely defined, and the bread itself has a nice crumb to it, as you can see. So I'll just break this in half and have a taste. It's nice and soft and has a lovely texture and a very good taste, and of course biting into the crust like that, you get that awesome sesame flavour as well. Very, very good indeed. I shall be having this for my lunch today, and probably have it with some soup with my dinner tonight as well. It's quite easy to make actually, but it does take that time because you have to make the starter and then you have to proof the dough and such like. But I hope you've enjoyed this recipe and maybe it will inspire you to try it. If you have enjoyed it, please give me the thumbs up below the video and click to subscribe to my YouTube channel. In the top right hand corner of the screen there will be an eye that you can click on, and that will take you to a link for the recipe, and I'll put a link below the video as well. And I'll be back with another recipe in the very near future. So until then, happy baking.